The golden rays of morning sunshine spilled into the vast living room, bouncing off the polished hardwood floor. To anyone walking past the street, the house looked perfect, an elegant mansion with wide French doors, white window frames, and a grand driveway that hinted at wealth and success. But inside, the air was heavy, tense, and bitter. The bucket tipped over, soapy water spreading across the wood like an unstoppable flood. On his knees, a man in dusty overalls clutched the mop like a lifeline. His face was twisted with pain, not just the physical ache of age but the kind of pain that comes from years of regret. His name was Richard Dalton, and at 62 years old, he was nothing more than a cleaner. But years ago, people had called him something very different. They had called him Mr. Dalton, the CEO. Standing above him was a woman half his age, her arms planted firmly on her hips. Her voice cut through the silence like a knife. "You clumsy old man, can't you do anything right? Look at this mess. Who's going to clean it up now?" Her words stung deeper than the soap burning the cuts on his palms. Richard lowered his head, ashamed, broken. To her, he was just another janitor, faceless, disposable, meant to serve and remain silent. She didn't know that the man crying on her polished floors had once owned a home like this, had once been celebrated, had once been powerful. The sudden click of polished shoes echoed through the room. The double glass doors swung open, and in walked a tall man in a tailored blue suit, pulling a maroon suitcase. He looked every inch a modern businessman, sharp, confident, untouchable. He paused, staring at the scene in front of him, the elderly man kneeling in soap, the angry woman towering above, and the silence broken only by muffled sobs. Richard froze. The mop slipped from his hand. His chest tightened as recognition struck. The man who had just walked in was his son. Years of memories rushed back in a flash. Boardrooms, late-night negotiations, headlines, awards. Richard had once been the founder and CEO of Dalton Enterprises, a multi-million-dollar logistics company that dominated the East Coast. He had built it from scratch, turning one delivery truck into an empire of hundreds. He had been relentless, brilliant, unstoppable. And for a time, he believed he was invincible. He remembered the night they celebrated their first billion in revenue, champagne flowing as employees cheered his name. He remembered taking Michael, his little boy, to the company's ribbon cutting, lifting him on his shoulders and promising, "One day, all of this will be yours." He remembered his wife, Laura, radiant in her pride, standing beside him on magazine covers and gala stages. But success demanded everything, and Richard gave it willingly. Each late night at the office became another missed birthday, another forgotten promise, another piece of family slipping away. Michael grew up seeing his father more on television interviews than across the dinner table. Laura's pride slowly withered into silence. And then came the mistakes. Hungry to expand, Richard pushed the company too far, too fast. He borrowed heavily, trusted partners who betrayed him, and ignored warnings in his obsession to stay ahead. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. Investors fled, debts piled up, lawsuits erupted. And the cruelest blow came when his own son, Michael, fresh out of Harvard with a sharp mind and a wounded heart, helped lead a hostile takeover. Dalton Enterprises survived, but Richard was erased. His name scrubbed from the walls, his portrait removed from the lobby, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in the halls he once ruled. After the fall, everything unraveled. His fortune vanished, his reputation destroyed, his home repossessed. His wife left, unable to endure the wreckage any longer. Michael severed all ties, leaving his father to drown in the ruins of ambition. Richard tried to fight back, but the world had moved on. In the eyes of society, he was finished. The years that followed were merciless. He drifted between odd jobs, security shifts, delivery routes, cleaning contracts. Every step down was another reminder of how far he had fallen. He told himself he deserved it, that this was justice for the pain he had caused. And so he accepted it, shoulders bent, eyes down, until he became nothing more than a man on his knees, scrubbing someone else's floors. Now, fate had brought his past crashing back into the same room. Michael's eyes locked onto his, sharp and unreadable. "Dad." The word cut through the air like thunder. Richard's heart stopped. He hadn't heard his son call him that in 10 years. For a moment, he thought he was imagining it. The woman blinked, confused. "Wait, Dad, you know this janitor." Michael's voice dropped, firm and bitter. "He's not just a janitor. He's my father." The words echoed in the room. Richard wanted to speak, to explain, to beg forgiveness, but his throat tightened and nothing came out. He could only sob, the shame burning deeper with every passing second. Michael stepped closer, his eyes scanning his father, the once mighty man now broken on a stranger's floor. "What happened to you?" His tone was sharp, filled with disbelief and hidden anger. Richard's lips trembled. He tried to hold back the truth, but it spilled out like the soapy water on the floor. I failed. I failed as a leader. I failed as a husband. I failed as a father." Michael's jaw clenched, his silence heavier than words. He looked as though he might turn and leave, but something in his gaze softened, something he couldn't bury no matter how much he wanted to. The woman snapped impatiently, "Well, if he's your dad, you better tell him to clean this up. I'm not paying him to cry on the floor." Richard's chest caved in at the humiliation. But before he could lower his head again, Michael turned on her, his expression dark. "You don't get to talk to him like that." She blinked, stunned, but Michael was already moving. He crouched down, meeting his father's eyes for the first time in years. "You don't belong here," Michael said softly. Richard shook his head. "This is where I belong now. This is what I've earned." The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the years they had lost. Richard's heart pounded, waiting for the final blow, for his son to walk away and leave him broken forever. But instead, Michael stood up, his voice sharp and commanding. "Pack your things, Dad. You're coming with me." Richard's hands trembled as he tried to process what he had just heard. For years he had convinced himself that his son wanted nothing to do with him, that their last meeting, cold, bitter, and final, had sealed his fate. And yet here Michael stood, tall and composed in his tailored suit, telling him to pack his things. The words felt impossible, like a dream, but the tone in Michael's voice left no room for doubt. The young woman folded her arms, her voice sharp with annoyance. "Excuse me, he hasn't finished cleaning. He works for me. You can't just..." Michael turned his head slowly, his eyes like steel. "He doesn't work for you anymore." She laughed bitterly, as though she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What, you're going to just take your janitor daddy away and pay for his mess?" Michael pulled a sleek card from his wallet and placed it firmly on the counter. "That should more than cover your floors, your bucket, and whatever dignity you think you've lost in the process. But my father doesn't kneel in your house again." She stood frozen, her mouth open but no words coming out. Richard stared at the floor, too ashamed to meet his son's gaze. When Michael bent down to help him stand, Richard's knees nearly gave way. His son's grip steadied him, strong and unyielding. For the first time in decades, Richard felt that Michael was the one holding him up, not the other way around. The drive back was silent, the car gliding through streets Richard barely recognized anymore. The city had grown and changed while he had shrunk into obscurity. Towering billboards and glowing skyscrapers reflected against the windows as memories clashed violently inside his head, the glory of his empire, the laughter of his family, the bitterness of betrayal. He pressed his forehead against the glass and closed his eyes, unable to stop the tears. When they arrived at Michael's penthouse, Richard hesitated at the doorway. It was sleek and modern, decorated with clean lines and expensive art, a space that spoke of success and order. Richard felt like a stain against it, a reminder of a failure that didn't belong in such a polished place. But Michael's voice broke the silence. Go inside, Dad. There's a guest room down the hall. Richard shuffled forward, each step heavy. He turned to his son and whispered, his voice breaking, "Why are you doing this? I don't deserve it. I was never there for you. I failed you." Michael poured him a glass of water and set it on the counter. His voice was steady but low. "Because you're my father. Because no matter what happened, I can't leave you on the floor of someone else's house. And because I refuse to make the same mistakes you did." The words pierced Richard's chest more deeply than any insult ever could. He wanted to defend himself, to say that every sacrifice, every late night, every deal had been for the family, for Michael. But in the deepest corner of his heart, he knew it wasn't the full truth. His ambition had consumed him, and he had let it. He had built an empire and lost the people who mattered most. The days passed slowly. Richard tried to keep busy, cooking small meals, tidying up corners of the penthouse, but every time, Michael stopped him. "You don't work for me, Dad. Just rest." It felt strange, even uncomfortable, to be cared for by the son he had abandoned, but slowly the silence between them began to thaw. At first, their conversations were short, polite. A comment about the weather, a remark about the city skyline, a question about the news. But little by little, the words grew heavier, digging into the wounds that had been festering for years. One evening, as the city lights flickered outside the tall windows, Michael finally asked the question that had burned inside him since childhood. "Why wasn't I enough?" His voice was quiet but sharp. "Why was the company always more important than me and Mom?" Richard's fork trembled in his hand. He set it down slowly, his eyes wet. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then, in a voice cracked with regret, he said, "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I stopped, everything would crumble. Afraid that if I wasn't building something bigger, I wasn't worth anything. I told myself it was for you, for your future. But the truth is, I was doing it for me. I thought ambition would make me immortal. All it did was make me empty." Michael's jaw tightened. His eyes glistened but he didn't look away. "Do you have any idea what it was like? Watching Mom cry alone. Waiting at every game, every school event, hoping you'd show up. Seeing you on television but never in the stands. Do you know how much I hated you?" Richard reached across the table, his hands trembling. His voice was barely a whisper. "And do you hate me still?" The silence hung heavy. Michael finally shook his head, his voice raw. "Not the same way. Not anymore. I don't know if I can forgive you, Dad. Maybe not fully. But I'm willing to try." Tears slid down Richard's face. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was more than he had ever hoped for. Weeks later, Michael surprised him by saying, "I want you to come to the board meeting with me." Richard stiffened, shaking his head instantly. "No, I don't belong there anymore." Michael's tone was firm. "You may not be the CEO anymore, but you're the reason that company exists. They should remember that." Walking through the revolving doors of Dalton Enterprises felt like walking into a memory. The marble lobby gleamed, the hum of employees filled the air, and every corner carried ghosts of Richard's past. Some glanced at him with recognition, whispers trailing in his wake. The fallen king had returned. In the boardroom, Michael stood tall at the head of the table. "Before we begin," he said, "there's someone you all need to acknowledge. This man built Dalton Enterprises from nothing. He created the foundation we all stand on today. He is my father, Richard Dalton." All eyes turned to him. For years, Richard had been invisible, a shadow sweeping other people's floors. Now, for a brief moment, he stood in the light again. Not as a CEO, not as a tycoon, but as a man reclaiming his dignity. His throat tightened, but he managed a nod, his voice trembling as he said, "Thank you." After the meeting, as they walked side by side through the halls he had once ruled, Richard turned to his son. His voice was hoarse, heavy with gratitude. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." Michael placed a steady hand on his father's shoulder. "Don't waste it. Richard's lips quivered into a smile, something he hadn't felt in years. The empire was gone. The titles, the wealth, the power, those were lost forever. But in the quiet strength of his son's forgiveness, Richard realized he had found something far greater. He had found the chance to be a father again. And this time, he would not let it slip away.